week. Appreciate all the love on the rock and roll interviews from last week. If you missed any of that, you can find it all in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault, whether it's David Bowie or John Bon Jovi or Billy Joel or Daryl Hall. It is all there for you. Please do go check it out. And you got any feedback, you can always throw me an email, nasty@WNST.net. Maybe one day I'll write a book on rock and roll. Who knows? I've done a couple of books. This guy, my next guest, has written a book that was released last month on the collision of the turbulent 60s and the Los Angeles Dodgers. And, of course, I did my baseball tour last year, 30 ballparks in 30 days. My favorite stadium, Dodger Stadium, where the Orioles played on the 4th of July. This is a story about history and bringing it all together, and not a bad time to be talking about how politics and sports converge as we're in the midst of Republican and Democratic national conventions and debates at this point. We welcome Michael Leahy, from the longtime Washington Post reporter who's written a book on the Dodgers. And first thing, Mike, welcome in, man. How are you? Happy summer to you. I hope you're cool wherever you are right now.
Nestor, thanks for having me.
Well,
I'm talking to you from Los Angeles, and the title of the book, just for your listeners who are tuning in, is "The Last Innocents: The Collision of the Turbulent '60s and the Los Angeles Dodgers." So I've been spending the last week here in Los Angeles talking about the Last Innocents, which again looks at a glamorous Dodger team in the 1960s, which won 2 World Series titles. And the 7 principal characters of my book, who include Sandy Koufax and Maury Wills and Wes Parker, had to do this amid all the social tumult of the 1960s. So the book is looking at the intersection of sports and the very turbulent decade of the 60s.
Well, and the Dodgers, I guess, as one of the, the venerable franchise and all of that, and I love Dodger Stadium. I love all the allure of all that. I actually wear a Dodgers cap from time to time, but I'm not a Dodgers fan. I'm more of a Padres fan in the National League and certainly an Orioles fan here in the American League. But, I go back to that time, and I guess the Dodgers were the first controversy, right, in bringing Jackie Robinson and breaking the color. I mean, nothing could be more political at that point in the world in history than that. And then, of course, they just pack up their bags in Brooklyn and move out to L.A. and kind of like the Beverly Hillbillies, just moved out west and, planted down there in Chavez Ravine. Everything about them carried a little bit of baggage at that particular point, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Dodgers were you pointed out rightly that the Dodgers broke the color barrier in bringing Jackie Robinson into the game in the late 40s. And then in the 1950s, as early as the 1950s, while the Dodgers were still in Brooklyn, you could look out onto the field and see a majority black ball club. The Dodgers were trailblazers in that sense, and you could look out on the field when the Dodgers arrived in the 1960s. And they arrived in 1958, played their first season in L.A. in 1958. You could look out on the field in the 1960s and again see a majority black ball club. So certainly the Dodgers were trailblazers in that sense. What they shared, though, with other clubs in baseball at that time was that the Dodgers owner, Walter O'Malley, and his general manager, Buzzy Bavasi, who was O'Malley's enforcer of sorts, were tight-fisted. So while the Dodgers were enormously progressive when it came to furthering racial integration of the game, they were similarly tight-fisted when it came to player salaries. So you had the odd sight of the Dodgers not paying any team in its any player in its history as much as $100,000 until 1966, when Sandy Koufax, after winning 26 games in 1965, and Don Drysdale, who had won 25, decided to hold out and finally persuaded the Dodgers to pay them slightly more than $100,000 apiece. But it wasn't until then, Nestor, that any Dodger earned as much as $100,000. So while the Dodgers were great trailblazers when it came to issues of race, they were as tight-fisted as their counterparts around the league.
Michael A. joining us here. He has written a book on the Dodgers. So, look, I write books, and my books are usually about championships or, there's a parade, and I get inspired, right, by what led to the parade. So those are the books I've written. Some of these, books, and I have authors on all the time, I wonder at what point, at what beach, over what cocktail, or on what airplane ride or cocktail napkin that you decide, hey, well, I'm going to pitch this out as a book idea, or sometimes for authors, the book idea gets pitched to them. Hey, we have an idea. You write about it. This feels like something that you obviously you wanted to go back and research, but this is a unique sort of topic, and a lot of this is sort of new information to me.
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'll tell you the origins of this. In 2008, Nestor, I covered the presidential campaign for the Washington Post. And I was writing in particular about John McCain. And after that long campaign, and in 2009, after a long period of writing about politics for the Post, I really wanted a break from politics for a while. And I thought nothing would be more fun than to return to the land of my youth, Los Angeles, which is where I'm talking to you from, and to do a story about Maury Wills, the Dodgers' electrifying shortstop and base stealer of the 1960s, who broke Ty Cobb's single-season stolen base record, his major league single-season stolen base record, in 1962. And the origins were there, and what so fascinated me in particular, Nestor, was what Wills had to go through as he was getting close to Cobb's record. Wills was the first baseball player in history to be challenging the revered record of a white legend. And this was 12 years, given it was 62, this was 12 years before Henry Aaron would break Babe Ruth's lifetime home run record. So Wills was really a trailblazer. He was receiving hate mail from white racists around the country. And he and his close friend, Sandy Koufax, struck upon a fascinating idea. Each man would open the other's mail and sift out any hate mail that that man was receiving.
Wow.
Sandy Koufax was receiving hate mail of his own in the form of anti-Semitic letters. So Wills began reading Sandy's mail to sift out the hate mail Sandy was getting. Sandy, in turn, was reading Maury's mail to sift out the racist mail. And predictably, Nestor, given that they were ball players, each man ribbed each other during the process. Sandy would say something to Maury along the lines of, Maury, you don't want to read this one. And Maury similarly would say to Sandy something like, man, you don't want to go near these letters. And so they were teammates.
It's kind of like Twitter today, right?
Yeah. And they were devoted to each other. They had each other's back. Maury went on that season to break Cobb's record and become the National League's most valuable player in the process. He would transform the sport, Nestor, in that he would make the stolen base an art form again and pave the way for players like Lou Brock, Rickey Henderson, and others. And Sandy Koufax, for his part, within a year of that time, Nestor, he would win 25 games, lead the Dodgers to a World Series sweep of the Yankees, and, of course, go on to become arguably the greatest pitcher of all time.
Wes Parker get any hate mail, Mike?
Wes Parker had a different set of problems. Wes Parker he was, of my 7 principal characters, Nestor, in the book, The Last Innocents, again, the collision of the turbulent 60s in the Los Angeles Dodgers, Wes had a different set of problems. Wes grew up in a very affluent Los Angeles suburb called Brentwood. And he grew up, his father was a business titan. Wes Parker grew up amid movie stars on his street. From the outside looking in, it looked as though that boy and that young man could not have led a more idyllic life. But he grew up in a house where he suffered from physical and emotional abuse. It was a horrific childhood. So for Wes Parker, baseball represented nothing less than salvation. I mean, he was playing, he told me during our more than 40 hours of interviews together, he played as if his life depended on him making the Dodgers and becoming a major league success. So his story is among the most moving in the book.
You know, when I think of those Dodgers, I think of Drysdale, and I know he's not one of your, your main protagonists in this story, but he certainly was larger than life amongst all of those guys, right?
Yeah, he was. What I did in selecting the 7 principal characters, I wanted men who were alive today.
Sure.
So they could sit, so that most of them could sit down for many hours. For instance, Maury and I sat down for more than 25 hours together. Again, Parker more than 40 hours. Drysdale was an extraordinary figure, and he and Sandy Koufax again really broke the log jam when it came to salaries. After the Dodgers won the World Series title in 1965, Sandy won 26 games in that season. Don Drysdale won 25 games. The men were yet again to be underpaid unless they took bold action. And they struck upon a novel idea, which was in an era when there was not yet a players' union, Nestor, and when players didn't have player agents, they decided to become a union of two men, hold out together, and each let the Dodgers owner, Walter O'Malley, and his general manager, Buzzy Bavasi, know that neither man would be signing his contract unless the other man was satisfied as well. So the Dodgers owner, O'Malley, understood that perhaps he could get along without the services of one of those two Hall of Fame pitchers for a period of time, but he certainly couldn't go without the services of both men. So it was O'Malley and Buzzy Bavasi who caved, and Koufax and Drysdale got much of what they wanted. And that was a historic breakthrough because unwittingly, in being so tight-fisted, O'Malley and Bavasi had also helped to light the match that created the fire that became the players union over time. So the owners in their tight-fistedness really set in motion the creation of the Players Union.
Michael A. is my guest. The book is The Last Innocents, The Collision of the Turbulent 60s and the Los Angeles Dodgers. It's available. You can find it out on Amazon. If you use the giveaspit.com website, a portion of those proceeds go back to our charity for leukemia. There Goes My Hero. As always, if you're out purchasing online, please use that. We would appreciate that. Now, I want to go back to, you write books about lots of things, and you've covered politics and sports. How are they similar? I've never covered politics. I mean, occasionally I tweet a thing here or there, and I don't regret that I tweet what I tweet. I guess I regret that our country is as divided as it is at this particular point, and, everybody has the instant, fingertips on the hot take, and they don't have to write letters and mail them off to Maury Wills or Sandy Koufax. I tell my wife the same thing they told each other. Don't read my tweets, honey. You just don't want to see them. But the politics and sports, you've covered them both. Not many people have been in that space, certainly covering presidential elections as well as baseball teams. Similarities, differences. I mean, I see many of the teams now that run themselves like they're running a political campaign every day, especially in the way that they ban media members, of which I'm one of those. I don't cover the Orioles anymore after 21 years because the owner doesn't like what I have to say. And I see that, politicians have taken to that place as well, but everybody's trying to get their message out, and there used to be a time where your message was the only message, and you could neuter the other side. That's all over with now on the internet, right?
Yeah, there is. I mean, there is a democratization of media today, and you're right that if you'd looked 20 years ago, most stories being written came out of the conventional newspapers and magazines, et cetera. And today, as you rightly suggest, anybody can get in on the game, really. It was, I think, the difference in writing this book as opposed to so many stories over the years I've done about politicians and other athletes is that the players involved in this book, The Last Innocents, the collision of the turbulent 60s and the Los Angeles Dodgers, these players really wanted their story told at a time in their life when some of them realized, frankly, Nestor, that they don't have a lot of years left. When you're writing about politicians in the heat of a political campaign or younger athletes, as was the case when I was writing my book about Michael Jordan, there was at times a measure of resistance because some of those politicians, some of those athletes, including Michael Jordan, really didn't want their story scrutinized. They didn't really want their careers scrutinized. In the case of politicians, their positions scrutinized, their lives scrutinized. But it was so different with this group of Dodgers. Again, these are men today, Nestor, who are in their late 70s and early 80s, and I think they have a keen sense of their own mortality. They know that time is ticking. Some of them said very forthrightly to me that they're aware they don't have a lot of years left and that they wanted their stories told. And so with people like Maury Wills and Wes Parker and Lou Johnson and Tommy Davis, the National League batting champion, and so on, they wanted their stories told in this book before it was too late. And I should say that in addition to these 7 principal characters, who again include, people like Maury Wills and Sandy Koufax and Wes Parker, Tommy Davis, and others, I spoke to more than 40 other Dodgers and their rivals. And I'm very grateful to former Orioles like Andy Etchebarren.
Sure.
Right? I know you're talking from Baltimore, who was enormously valuable in writing my chapter about the 1966 World Series, where the Dodgers, after winning the National League pennant on the final day, fell in 4 games to the great Orioles club, which had immortals like Frank Robinson, Brooke Robinson, Jim Palmer, and others. Many Minnesota Twins.
Don't forget Luis Aparicio. Throw him in there, too. If you're going to talk Wills in 66, you got to throw my cousin in there. Come on now.
Your namesake. Absolutely. And great New York Yankees who included Jim Bouton and Phil Linz and others. And so I couldn't be more grateful to all those men as well for giving me their time. And on the subject of Luis Aparicio, Nestor, let me mention that it is time for Maury Wills to be included in the ranks of the Hall of Fame and sit alongside Luis Aparicio in that department. The 2 men led similarly fantastic careers. Louis received the honor of being elected to the Hall of Fame.
In his last year, by the way. He was about to fall off the ballot in 84 when they put him in. That's
right. And it is time that Maury Wills be elected and join Louis in that illustrious ranks of the Hall of Fame. Maury, like Louis, had an incredible career. Maury revolutionized base running, led the Dodgers to World Series championships in 1963 and 1965, along with Sandy Koufax. And Maury was very close the last time the Veterans Committee voted on Hall of Fame members, and the next vote will be coming up, I believe, next year in 2017. And it's time for Maury to be elected as well. So, I was so lucky, Nestor, to spend time with Maury and Wes and Tommy and Lou, and to speak to people like Sandy Koufax as well for this book, The Last Innocents. I'll always be enormously grateful to these many men for giving me so many hours of their time.
Well, you can't write a book without a lot of hours and a lot of love. Last thing for you here on this book, Tommy Davis was a guy who had a couple of pretty productive years for the Orioles in my childhood. He was on the first Orioles teams I remember in 72, 73, 74. Certainly was a beneficiary early on, as well as Gates Brown and a couple of other guys of the designated hitter in the American League. But there's a guy that bounced around a bunch in the late 60s, and from my research on baseball, and I read Lords of the Realm, and I'm very into the business of baseball, which is one of the reasons Mr. Angelos hates my guts here and took my press pass, because I do write about the intent, I do write about the business, I do write about the history. But Tommy Davis, one of those guys bouncing around, I'm assuming he was a little bit of a malcontent and wanted money, and the Dodgers just got tired. That's why guys bounced around in that era. It wasn't about how they played, it's how they kind of got along with people, and Tommy Davis is one of those guys that played in more organizations than just about anybody during that era.
Well, so Tommy Davis also received a terrible break, quite literally a terrible break. In 1965, after winning the 1962 and 1963 batting crowns, Nestor, the National League batting crowns, and being the National League's most prolific RBI man in 1962, in early 1965, Tommy Davis, who at that point looked like he was on his way to the Hall of Fame. He was having that stellar of a career. Tommy Davis broke his ankle in early May of 1965, and his career was never quite the same. To this day, Sandy Koufax believes that Tommy Davis was en route to the Hall of Fame, but for that ankle injury. Odd things happened in the aftermath of Tommy's injury. He was never quite the same player for the Dodgers. As you pointed out, he would be traded away. But when Tommy Davis was sidelined in 1965, it paved the way for an obscure minor league outfielder who had spent nearly all of his 20s in the minor leagues, a man named Lou Johnson, to be called up to the Dodgers from the Dodgers minor league Spokane club. And Lou Johnson went on that year, Nestor, to become the Dodgers' Cinderella hero in the World Series. He hit what proved to be a game-winning home run in Game 7 of the World Series against the Minnesota Twins, the same game in which Sandy Koufax threw a 3-hit shutout against the Twins on 2 days' rest. The Dodgers won 2-0, and the Dodgers became the World Series champions yet again. And so Lou Johnson and Tommy Davis were folk heroes in Los Angeles in that period, in an era, Nestor, where African-American players were often heroes on the field and would be discriminated off it. The Civil Rights Act was not passed until 1964. And so for players like Maury Wills, Tommy Davis, they could find themselves on the cover of a major national magazine like Sports Illustrated one week and find themselves denied service in a restaurant or bar the next week. And so what's so moving...
And that's Ali's story during that era, too. We covered Ali's death last month. Everyone
right.
would tell the same story of Ali in Louisville and the whole deal, right?
Right. Yeah, so what was so moving was that these men who were grappling with off-field challenges during an era of segregation could deal with all that and then turn their attention to the field, play with poise and bravery, and win on the field. So, and that was sometimes lost in the 60s. These players on a glamorous team nonetheless had to deal with the same kind of off-field challenges as tens of millions of their countrymen. And in 1964, Nestor, when the Civil Rights Act was finally passed, the Dodgers found themselves in St. Louis on a road trip. So one day, a restaurant which only the day before had been barred to Maury Wills was suddenly open to him. So Maury went into the restaurant and finally was able to get a meal there for the first time. So, these men were dealing with these extraordinary off-field challenges and segregation during the same period when they were these glamorous stars on the field and finding themselves on the covers of national magazines. So it was an odd juxtaposition, and these men could not have handled it with more poise. And as I said earlier, I'll forever be grateful to all these men who shared their stories with me in the book, The Last Innocents.
Longtime Washington Post writer and author Michael Leahy joining us here. The book is The Last Innocents, the collision of the turbulent 60s in the Los Angeles Dodgers. And, of course, I must point out that you wrote one of the quintessential books on Michael Jordan, When Nothing Else Matters, Michael Jordan's last comeback. I guess even a decade and a half later, that is still an amazing story every time the Michael Jordan crying meme shows up, right?
Yeah, it was. I loved writing that book as well, Nestor. The challenges, as I said earlier, could not have been more different. When I was covering Michael Jordan during his comeback with the Washington Wizards,
which wasn't a good look for the most part, right? I mean, that era is very forgettable.
Right. That's exactly right, Nestor. I mean, there were many people in his circle, in his coterie, who did not want to see that book written because, as you say, it was not a good period for Michael, and there was dissension in the Washington Wizards, a franchise at that point. Jordan had difficult relations with the Wizards owner, Abe Pollin. Even some of Jordan's teammates on that Wizards team were not crazy about all the things he was doing. So there was a lot of contentiousness as I was researching and writing that book. And there was the obvious contrast to the enormous enthusiasm that I received from the Dodger players in writing this book, The Last Innocents. These Dodger players, by contrast, really wanted their story told in The Last Innocents. So, yeah, it was the two books could not have been more different in that sense.
Yeah, I've written a book on Peter Angelos that he doesn't want written, but it happens to be the truth in his life story. And he thought he wanted his life story written until it actually lived out over the last 25 years. And we're still living that story. You're in Washington. You know all about the Masson deal and the money and the Nationals, and that'll be the next book. Mike, it's great having you on, man. I really wish you a lot of luck with your book. I know what an undertaking it is to write any book at any point and certainly to promote it. And I'm pleased you came on to talk to us about it, and I'm looking forward to checking it out.
Nestor, thanks so much for having me and for all the great questions.
You got it. Michael Leahy joining us here, The Last Innocents, the collision of the turbulent 60s and the Los Angeles Dodgers, available on Amazon or anywhere fine books are sold. Don't forget to use that giveaspit.com app on your mobile phone, and we help our friends at There Goes My Hero and leukemia patients here locally when you purchase through our app on Amazon. You can find me out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Simply download the TuneIn Radio app. We come in crystal clear. All the rock and roll stuff is there from last week as well if you want to check that out. It is the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault. You can reach me anytime, nasty at WNST.net. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram. Anywhere you are, we are. WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports. WNST rock and roll pursuits last week. If you missed any of the rock and roll interviews with, Billy Joel or John Bon Jovi or David Bowie, Meatloaf, any of those guys, it's all in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault there for you 24 hours a day. They're living there these days, and you can check them out, and we'll be adding more to it for the next time that we do that. But we're back onto the playing field right now, and the first place Baltimore Orioles are headed to New York to take on the Yankees. You know, Singleton loves the Orioles so much, he's just taking a series